The nodes have shifted into Virgo and Pisces. It's a major karmic moment. Let's break it down. This is the evolutionary astrology perspective on the nodes of the moon changing signs. Over the last 18 months, they've been in Libra and Aries, and over the next 18 months, they will be in Virgo and Pisces, highlighting the tension between these opposite signs. And from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, we see these points as the karmic points. We very much use the reincarnational model in our work. So the karmic wave is changed in a big way for humanity and will affect humanity in a very obvious way, highlighting particular karmic lessons for us. Over the last year and a half, the nodes have highlighted the tension of Libra-Aries, making themes such as passivity versus action, femininity versus masculinity, codependence versus independence, and an internal resentment versus courageous boundary setting. So this has been a big part of the learning curve for us as collective consciousness. Now that has shifted into a completely different territory, which is Virgo-Pisces. So let me go ahead and bring up the chart so that you can see what I'm looking at here. I'm filming this video during the Aquarius new moon. We're not going to talk about that today. But wow, a lot of Aquarius energy in the sky right now. I suppose it's worth mentioning. We're going to be focusing on these nodes here, again, Virgo-Pisces, but as we can see, we have 3 planets in Pisces joining the North Node in Pisces. One thing that leapt out to me right when I saw this chart was that we have 5 of the 10 planets in air signs, Aquarius and Gemini, and then we have 4 of the 10 planets in water signs, Pisces and Cancer, along with the North Node of the Moon in Pisces. And air signs are on the mental plane, the objective plane. Water signs are on the emotional and subjective plane. So as we contemplate the meaning of the nodes changing signs, as we integrate that with the overarching theme of what's going on today during this new moon phase, it's about developing a strong intellectual understanding about that which is subjective, air, water. And with the case of Pisces, this does put a particular focus on not only the subjective and emotional, but also the ethereal and the mystical, because Pisces is known as the mystic archetype, which is something we're going to be talking a lot about today. As many of you know, Pluto entered Aquarius, where it will be for the next 20 years, which is a major learning curve for us as humans. 2 decades. Now, if you want to learn more detail about this major event, I did a full video on it. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link at the end. You'll see it on the screen there as the video ends. I highly recommend you check it out. But in light of those core evolutionary intentions for this upcoming generation, we look into the minutia of where we're at now over the next 18 months as we try to embrace the North Node in Pisces, the mystic archetype. And it's through these potential mystical breakthroughs that they're ultimately aimed towards the Aquarius goals of liberation of humanity. The transiting nodes represent 2 main things. The first thing is it says a lot about the babies that will be born over the next 18 months. About what their past lives must have been like, their own karmic conditioning, which will be a major part of their evolution in the entirety of their lifetime upcoming. That's not the focus of this video. That's a major subject. The second thing the transiting nodes do is focus on the karmic energetic shift for humanity, inviting us to wrestle with these signs right now. Virgo-Pisces. I'm going to focus on the South Node in Virgo first, and as you'll see, I'll be describing the more darker elements of Virgo. Not to be negative, but only because that's more useful information. The South Node of the Moon is the karma point. Karma is habitual energy of the past. The Virgo karma has ripened for us now, and we're ready to work through the dark side of Virgo. Now, Virgo has beautiful aspects to it, some of which I'll highlight today. But at first, I want to focus on the lesson plan. Where does Virgo suck? How can we trip up with Virgo? And then use that information as a launching pad for our understanding how we embrace the North Node as sort of a karmic remedy or medicine to the darker motivations of Virgo. And since the South Node is habitual karmic energy of the past, it has a certain charge to it. It's compelling within the hearts and minds of humans. Not all humans, obviously, but we will see more dark side Virgo over the next 18 months across the collective, more than what would be considered normal, because that karmic wave has shifted, because we're trying to learn that Virgo lesson. So therefore it becomes more obvious through the synchronistic wave, so that we're reminded day by day of what we still have to work on, the wrinkles we need to iron out. And how we iron out those wrinkles, again, is embracing the positive expression of the North Node in Pisces. Now, the North Node, unlike the South Node, has no charge to it. It's nothing but a good idea. So therefore, the South Node's compelling, the North Node isn't. Therefore, the North Node is very hard to work with, to reach, and to master. It takes a conscious awareness, focus, and force of will to achieve the evolutionary intention of the North Node in Pisces. And Pisces is so strong here because, as you'll notice, it's joined by Neptune in Pisces. By the way, Neptune is the planet that rules Pisces. Whenever a planet's in its own sign, it's the strongest it will ever be. Here it is holding hands with the North Node, holding hands with Venus. You also have Saturn nearby. Now, Saturn's about, 12 or 13 degrees away from the North Node, so I wouldn't really consider it a conjunction yet. But over the coming months, that will become a very strong conjunction and will be more of a focus in future videos. But a lot of Pisces energy. Some people get caught in the trap in the world of astrology of basically South Node bad, North Node good. Let me try to completely disregard and avoid the South Node as I work with the North Node. Now, maybe that's not the worst way to work with it. But ideally, we want to be wary of the excesses of the darker motivations of Virgo as we embrace the North Node. But ideally, we want to find a happy marriage or arrangement between the two and manifest both positively and integratively. And that's the A+ on the report card version. Starting with Virgo, it's known as the Virgin archetype. It has nothing to do with sexuality. Virgo is following the path of purity. That's what it means, the Virgin archetype. To become more pure. And that's a beautiful thing, the goal to become pure. I mean, many Virgos are very driven because of this. To become pure, to become impeccable, to become perfect. And therefore, it's linked to the perfectionist archetype. Now, in the goal, the quest of receiving purity, or becoming purity, really, if we tweak that more darkly, and it is distorted through the lens of fear consciousness, egoism, and pride, perfectionism eventually sours into an unfair and harsh standard for oneself. Virgo represents the comparison with the actual and the ideal. Here is what is, here is what should be. So fear consciousness Virgo distorts the Virgin archetype into an unhealthy form of perfectionism. And this can manifest as a sort of fear-based worry and concern of we're not good enough or I'm not good enough, we could do better, which again can be a good thing. It can be highly motivational, but it can also generate as feelings of self-doubt, self-punishment, worry, and concern. I would say, all the signs are vulnerable to fear consciousness. The ways in which that's manifested are different from each other. But I would say with the South Node in Virgo, fear consciousness is really the greatest enemy to the evolution of humanity right now, and would ultimately, if it grows out of control, block us from climbing the ladder of spiritual consciousness towards this more evolved, humble, and compassionate state of being. It will be very common for us to observe in the behavior of many others this fear consciousness manifesting as this crippling self-doubt, self-questioning, a lot of, since we're talking about the collective here, a lot of questioning of humanity's pathway moving forward. But also, and when we talk about the behavior of this as it's projected and externalized, it manifests as the nitpicker or the shouldinator, where a lot of people are in other people's business because they perceive the other person as doing a wrong action and therefore will try to control the external environment because of that fear and pride. The other archetype I want to introduce here is that of the servant. And following the path of service is a very beautiful, healthy, humble path for you Virgos out there. That's stating it positively. The negative flip side to the servant archetype is subservience or slave consciousness. A lot of folks will begin to feel stuck or trapped or in situations where they feel like they're giving all their power away, where other people are taking advantage of their helpful spirit. We'll see these themes a lot as well. There will be more to say about the virgin and the servant, especially when we tie in Pisces. But let's first explore Pisces, which again is with Neptune in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces over the following months. Eventually they'll meet up at the beginning of Aries, but really over the next 18 months, Pisces is the most important sign people can be working with. I mean, mileage may vary. It really depends on the person's individual chart. But when we talk about collective learning, the karmic lesson plan, Pisces is where it's at. Pisces is known as the visionary, the mystic, the dreamer, and the poet. These are the main archetypes. So there is a very creative side of Pisces, the visionary, and the dreamer. So for you Pisces folks out there, if I was giving a personal reading to you, I would really focus on this creative visionary side, among other things. But Pisces represents all the creativity that's available to human consciousness. So this idea of all the signs, one of its greatest strengths is to visualize with the power of the mind, hence the visionary state. So much creativity associated with this, especially with, again, Neptune, which it represents the sea of consciousness, because it's known as the god of the sea, again, in its own sign. And here it is next to Venus. And Venus, on one level, is known as the goddess of the arts. It's a very creative planet. So here we have Venus, the goddess of the arts, in the sign of the visionary. This highlights the potential for ecstatic states of consciousness through the act of creativity and becoming the conduit for the muse. Even if it's hard to reach that or attain that level of spiritual consciousness in the creative act because of the karmic charge of fear consciousness, worry, and concern. So for those of you out there who are very sensitive creatives, over the next 18 months, my recommendation for you is to really lean into that and to not allow Virgo and fear consciousness to create a block of your creative genius. There's an amazing book out there called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he says the artist's greatest enemy is resistance with a capital R. It's that internal resistance and monologue of negative thoughts and negative feelings. You know, Virgo is one of the signs that's very vulnerable to the monkey mind. Oh, you're not good enough, you know. And it can create a certain, let's say, writer's block, so to speak, and create this sort of interference in the mind that will then block the connection to divine inspiration. So we just want to be very careful about that. Now, on to another level. Obviously, the spiritual aspect of these symbols is quite strong. The mystic archetype is on steroids right now, which highlights the evolutionary goal for humanity to start sprouting those angel wings. Now, with the North Node, of course, we're not guaranteed that. The rapid acceleration of spiritual consciousness over the next 18 months is not guaranteed, but that's the greatest prize. Notions like cosmic consciousness and enlightenment are associated with not only Neptune, but with Pisces as well. More broadly, if we talk about the higher octave expression of Pisces or the virtue of Pisces, it represents compassion, unconditional love. Love is really the key focus here. Neptune, because it represents God consciousness, represents therefore unconditional love. Love others as much as you love yourself, that sort of thing. Treat others like you'd want to be treated. Unconditional love. Well, it's sitting right next to Venus right now, which is known as the goddess of love in the sign of the mystic. And Venus represents human love, which in many ways is conditional. So you have the planet of unconditional spiritual love and the planet of human conditional love, Neptune, holding hands in the sky right now in the visionary mystical sign of Pisces. So the attainment of deeper levels of love with this more saintly energy that we try to radiate out into the field around us. So is it the egoic nitpicker, shouldinator Virgo trying to fearfully control that which is external and out of one's control? Or embracing Pisces, which represents a more, humble and wise spiritual understanding? So somebody does something that we really don't like. Well, how do we choose to think, feel, and act in that moment? Will I condemn that person and judge them? That's really dark side Virgo. Or will I choose to pray for that person so that they have less ignorance and misunderstanding, that they spiritually evolve? That's more the Pisces perspective. Now, which action of those two is more likely to create a positive outcome? Well, this is where we connect to the idea of the fundamental law, especially with emotions and thoughts, which is attraction and repulsion. Like attracts like, opposites repel. So if you condemn and judge, you will create more fear consciousness in the world because you'll radiate out in the field because your intention previous to the action was imbued with that fear consciousness and egoism. You will create more of that. You'll create that attractor field. Like attracts like. Or if you pray for that person for more wisdom, understanding, and spiritual evolution, you're creating a more positive attractor field. And that generates a net positive within the world. And the more love you generate, you will therefore repel egoism and fear consciousness because it'll have that repulsion. Opposites repel. My favorite mystic, he was a Cypriot Christian mystic. He had a phrase. He said, "Nothing matters very much, and most things don't matter at all." That's a very Pisces perspective, a spiritual perspective, if you will. Now, Virgo really focuses on the details. It's the most analytical of all the signs. And it in some moments might say, oh, yeah, a lot of things matter and they should matter. There's that sort of shouldinator energy. So we can feel the tension. I mean, they're two legitimate perspectives. They're part of human reality, but we're trying to find this integrative whole. So nothing matters very much. Most things don't matter at all. This connects to the idea of universal law of cause and effect. Karma, what you shall reap, you shall sow. If you do an evil deed, there will be a balancing. There's a beautiful elegance with the universe and how that balancing occurs. So instead of trying to control the external environment and others' actions, just sort of let go and let God, pray, so to speak, and let the chips fall as they may because of that universal elegance and karmic balancing. And then also the other idea that if you were to project your consciousness, you're much more likely to do damage within the collective because you're creating that fear attractor field. With North Node in Pisces next to Neptune in Pisces, I think the single most important thing folks can focus on out there in their daily life over the next year and a half is an enrichment of their spiritual life. I know that's rather vague. It's meant to be vague because spiritual development means different things to different people. But it's about deepening one's connection to the divine. Now, if you feel a bit lost on how you can do that, you can consult with your chart, your own personal birth chart. Find out where the Neptune is in your chart. That'll give you some hints about your spiritual path. Look to see where transiting North Node and Neptune are right now in your chart. That can give you some clues. If you want, you can ask some questions in the comments. Keep in mind, I'm not looking at your chart, so I have insufficient data, but perhaps I can be helpful. Ask some questions below. Or if you want a more personalized reading, of course, I have my services on my website. You can see the link on the screen. But how do you talk to God? That's a sweet and a tender question. How you communicate with the divine is only something you can answer, but we all have that ability to surrender. So is it flow or control? Is it spiritual or hypercritical? Is it faith or doubt? Is it boundlessness or bounded? Is it vision or division? Is it meditative or iterative? This gives us a sense of the polarity between dark Virgo and high-end Pisces. And although we get a feeling of the juxtaposition between light and dark, the question is, what's the integration between the two? Again, it's not South Node bad, North Node good. It's like, how do I integrate these two different symbols? And the thing is, with opposite signs, ultimately they're opposite sides of the same coin. They can find a happy marriage between them. So one powerful integration is, you have the servant archetype of Virgo and the mystic of Pisces. You kind of throw them in the cocktail shaker and come up with this sort of meta archetype or evolutionary intention. The idea of the spiritual path of selfless service, described as karma yoga out of India, the spiritual path of action and selfless service. On another level, Virgo, when it's really cranking at a high level, it's the most humble of all the signs. So this really highlights the spiritual pursuit of developing more humility and compassion, and to also develop awareness about our own prideful nature, and really lean into humility instead of pride and fear. Some core evolutionary questions over the next year and a half are, can I replace Virgoan worry and concern with more Piscean serenity and peace? Or, what does selfless service mean to me? And how can I effectively integrate that into my life, with the goal being, again, to generate good karma? Or, if I get challenged by a feeling of subservience or slave consciousness, how can I shift into a form of service that feels good, that feels better, to where I feel joy through the act of service? And as you imbue your consciousness with joy, that will therefore raise your consciousness, create that attractor field, and ripple out into the field. Again, with the nodes, it's not either or. It's yes, both, in the best possible way. And trying to become keenly aware of the intoxicating dark side of the force with Virgo, trying to pull you into the pit of despair of fear consciousness and controlling one's internal and external environment. Being aware of that, while I keep my eye on the prize of the Piscean prize, God. These are the core evolutionary intentions, with the goal being to expand our consciousness.